Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Strategy Factory. I am Lucas Goransky, and today I'll be talking with Pia Heidenmark Cook, Senior Advisor for IKEA and former Chief Sustainability Officer, and now building a portfolio as a board director at multiple companies around the world. Pia, good morning for you. Thank you so much for coming, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you, and thank you for having me.
It's a big pleasure. Pia, you have a huge story to tell. There's you have a big experience behind you, and also a lot coming in the next few years for you as well. So can you tell everyone listening today in just a few sentences who's Pia and the things that motivate you?
Yeah, I'm more than my job, but I'll focus on what I do. So I've been at IKEA for the last 13 years. Before that, I was in the hospitality industry and been working with sustainability for the last 25 years. So in Residor as head of sustainability, and then the same at IKEA with the chief sustainability officer as the last assignment. And Swedish, having lived in France and Belgium and married to a Canadian. So, and have traveled pre-COVID times a lot. So I feel I've never been to Australia, but I feel like I've been to most parts of the world and really enjoy meeting new people and new cultures. And so the meeting of people is an important part of the business travel part.
Absolutely. And we'll be happy to have you whenever you decide to come. There's a lot of topics that I want to touch in our meeting or in our interview in the next few minutes. But I want to start by asking you, what do you think is the largest problem that big organizations are facing today when it comes to their sustainability strategies?
The largest, there's so many of them. I think the largest, I think there's two things. One is sustainability per se, the topic. I think it's the complexity of it and the breadth of it, because it is fundamentally about everything from community, human rights, how you treat your staff, to quite scientific topics like climate change, water scarcity, biodiversity. So it's the depth and breadth and complexity of the topic, I think, is for many companies a bit difficult to grasp. Then I would say, in general, the problem I see in companies is that there are too many laggards. There are too many who have not yet really started. So if you look at research and trackings, there's only a handful of companies in each sector that have set science-based targets in line with the Paris Agreement, so 1.5 degrees. So I would say one of the biggest problems of companies when it comes to sustainability is that there are too few that have really started to act on it. And those who have, many who have started to act, are still seeing it from a risk and compliance perspective, rather than see it at a strategic topic on how they can build their business and become more relevant and future-proof their business.
That's yeah. I completely understand, and I think there's a lot to add on there, and obviously a lot to explore. But then I think the next question that comes to mind is, who is then driving this change? Do you think is it the consumers? Is it the businesses themselves? Are they the governments? Or is it the new startups and small businesses that are coming up and saying, hey, we can supply these better products or better services. If these laggards don't adapt, we will take over the reign.
I think it's a combination, and I think it's different phases. So I think one of the things I did learn in school is the importance of the stakeholder model. And there's a lot of us, many of us go into one trajectory of I've always been in business or in academia. Others spend their whole life in government or the more official sectors or NGOs. And it's always like, we are going to save the world, or we are going to make the big difference. But it is the combination of all of us that's really going to make the difference. So if you take some of the legislation that's coming now, at least in Europe, and it's coming in other parts of the world, but around electrification, and a lot of mayors are going out saying, we will not in 10 years, 5 years, allow diesel trucks on our roads, for air quality, for health, and for environment. So you could say, oh, the movement is driven by legislation and government. I'm not sure that they would have made a strict legislation if there hadn't been a startup from California, I'm not going to name any names, that had really taken big steps forward and making electric vehicles much more feasible and less of a dream far away, but much more like it can actually happen. And it's going exponentially really fast. So you need a startup, but then of course there's a whole infrastructure of investors around. You start to see other bigger companies putting in goals like IKEA, setting a goal that by 2025 we will have 100% home delivery by electric or other zero emission. So I think it's the combination and that ecosystem of different players that create the timing for either legislation or for consumers to start to be aware, and you get that tipping point where everyone's like, of course I'm doing this. You see the same for plant-based food. So it's that combination of, but I do believe in the power of companies of being entrepreneurs and using their capabilities and competence and entrepreneurship to find solutions to problems we face. It's not enough with legislation. It's not enough with NGOs saying we have a problem, we need to do this and this. We need those who actually have the mechanisms and ability to do it. But you can't just have that. You need all.
That's super interesting. And I think one of the things that I'm thinking of right now is, but what happens when the consumer itself is not demanding it, right? Because obviously you live in Sweden, I'm in Australia, all over Europe there are I don't know, millions of consumers that are demanding this new sustainable products or services. But then there's still I think I'm saying this right, but there's probably the majority of the people are still putting price on top of everything else, and that's the only thing that they care for. And if it's cheaper, it's better. So why would a company today with no legislations backing it up or with no real need change their business models or adapt their business models to be more sustainable?
Two answers to that. One, I think also in Europe and also in the Nordics, where sustainability has been part of the kind of consumer agenda for a long time. All the research we do at IKEA shows that there's very, very few, it's a very small segment of the market that are really interested in inconvenience and high prices. So you need to place yourself is that this is not a niche thing that you do to attract a higher price. Because you need the volume and you need it to be your business. So I think that is one answer to it, that you'll maybe in the future, but right now you will not know where you are. You'll find consumers in the quantities you need to really make it business relevant that are interested in paying more and having convenience. So that's the consumer answer. I would say the business answer is, I'm hoping that we're not just doing things because of the consumer. There are many companies out there that are creating the demand from consumers. They're kind of listening, tuning into what is needed and finding that niche and having then the abilities to build a market around it. I think that's what we've seen with digital for the last 10 years. I don't think people knew that they needed an iPhone or AirPods or whatever, but the kind of creativity and the ingenuity of the people in companies found that and built something around it. And I would say the third answer, which I think is the most important answer, is why do you exist as a company? Are you just there to please customers here and now, or even where they were? Or what's your purpose? Who are you as a company? What gives you that kind of extra raison d'être like how do you feel that you are leaving something really good behind? Because the statistics, I mean, the science, it's not a question of if this is happening or if this is real or not. It is. And yes, it's maybe easier if you have a gun to your head with legislation coming and making the production of your product 10 times more expensive in a year if you don't change, or if you have all your consumers saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy from you unless you change, that then you're like in this, okay, we need to change, otherwise we're dead. But I think business strategy is about having that feeling of what's happening in the market and how can we be ahead, or even more importantly, how can we create the things that will be needed. And there's such a untapped potential right now with just understanding the sustainable development goals, understanding what's happening in society, what's happening with the environment, and really looking at how can we tap into this and create business opportunities and build something and grow, because there will be a demand for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this idea of purpose obviously is so important. I think one of the biggest problems that we see today is that a lot of businesses say they have a purpose, or they always share their purpose and their vision of making things so great for everyone and living a beautiful planet for kids. But then we fall into this idea of greenwashing, or we're doing, we're doing the minimum, or we're just over communicating, because one of the biggest abilities that marketing departments have is that they come in and they pick up something that I know R&D or supply chain is doing, and oh, now we're saving 4% on fuel because we've changed to LED lights. Oh, we need to communicate this because this is huge. And then the consumers come in and they're like, oh, but I'm feeling great because I'm buying this product from this company that is using LED lights, and now I feel like I'm contributing my grain of salt. But what are your thoughts on this, on companies that are using marketing or marketing departments that are over communicating things that are maybe not that real change that we need?
Yeah, I think it's there's two sides to it, because one is, I'm worried if we put sustainability only in the we do it because we're a nice company, values driven box, so we shouldn't reap any commercial benefits of it, because I don't think it will be long lived if you're only doing it because you have a big heart and you're going to save the world. Because in the system we're in, the purpose of business is finding ways of solving problems with a product, a service, or something that is needed, but also to then make a profit, because if you don't make a profit, you're out of business. So I think that there is a commercial element to sustainability, and has to. But if you are not walking the talk, first of all, from an employee base, they'll see through it quite quickly. So when they might be saying things officially, but then what are they saying around the dinner table on Saturday night when friends are asking? So then you get kind of two reputations, the real one and the kind of glossy magazine one. So I think there is that element, but then of course it is difficult with communication. In general, but also sustainability. I think especially in the last few years, when consumers have started to care more, and also policymakers, there is a lot of people are running towards sustainability topics to talk about them. And there might be one or two companies, or maybe a handful, that have found that good way of talking about it that really fits with who they are, what they do, and the kind of right level of communication, and also the right tone of voice. But it's really, really tricky, because if you talk too much, then it's greenwash. And if you talk too little, people assume that you're not doing anything, or that you're hiding something. So you need to find that right balance. So I think finding the way of working internally between the sustainability department and the marketing/communication department, so that you're agreeing key messages, you check claims and statements you do, because you can so easily overclaim. So like you said, you make a hen out of a feather, but you can also make statements that are just blatantly wrong without knowing it, because it's very scientific. So I think it's just finding that way of working together to make it work.
That's great. And do you think that sustainability in a few years will not be, because today is still seen as a competitive advantage, right? Today is still something that companies highlight because that makes them stand out from other companies. Is your wish as a consumer, as an advocate, to see sustainability not being communicated in the future because it's just the way it is? Is that the goal?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I guess having done this for 25 years, always thinking it's going to soon happen. I'm not sure when when we will be there, but yeah, definitely. I think two answers. Definitely, I think it will become, or has to become, like quality, and I do think it actually will, because I think this time we have reached that kind of tipping point where it starts to move in enough countries and sectors and among investors. So it should be like quality or price, that it's part of the mix. But of course, price is still a competitive advantage, or quality, if you're a bit better than the rest. So I think it will be more, maybe more natural part of that mix. But then I also, of course, hope that this kind of, I don't know, announcement frenzy that we're in right now, where everyone wants to be seen as, yay, we are better and we are doing more, that phase, I hope we will pass, because sustainability is pre-competitive and we need to work together. And I think a lot of companies are realizing that the solution doesn't sit within you becoming the best on sustainability, because it's too big and too complex. So it's a bit dual answer, but I hope that we relatively fast move away from this phase that we're in right now.
That's great. Kind of double clicking into IKEA and your experience there, obviously so many years, something that you guys have managed to do extremely well is not just working on your internal processes and systems for them to be sustainable, but also working on a very complex value chain, working with independent contractors or with suppliers. How was that journey? Obviously, it's a very long answer, but what was that journey all about? And I imagine that when you started there and when you started working, it was in one stage, and now it's in a completely different. And I think my key question here is, what were your biggest takeaways that maybe someone who is in sustainability working in another massive company can learn from your journey?
I think it's a good question. I think it's a multifaceted answer, and it changes over time, because you go through different phases as a company. So if I look at how we started working in the supply chain, first of all, it's always been a very key part of who we are as IKEA. So working with suppliers has been, it's kind of the way of how we manage to put affordable products on the market, having an integrated value chain. So working with suppliers have been critical for many, many years. So I think that made it maybe easier for us to step in that space, because we're already on the shop floor with factory suppliers, looking at how do we design this product in the best way, but with that price point in mind. So we kind of always already co-created. Then we had a few issues in the supply chain in the 90s that made us also kind of aware of the risks we were taking by having this model. And I think the beauty of a brand like IKEA, or a company like IKEA, and there are many out there, is when you are values driven and purpose led, when you find a problem, you don't put in the communication department saying, oops, make that go away, make that look good. You really go like, okay, there might be something there. Let's investigate, let's understand it. And that's what we did. Working then already back in the 90s with external partners, so NGOs that had expertise in those areas to really help us build then our first code of conduct that we launched in 2000. So that was one phase of just kind of gathering insight, understanding, building that code so that we had something to have a dialogue with the business partners with. And then there was a phase of very much of auditing and checking and following up, and that extra thing you need to do. We had quite a long phase of that. Then you go more into this phase of collaboration and learning. We also had a phase of consolidation. So went from having a lot of suppliers to actually about 1,200 for a company the size of IKEA. It's not that huge on the home furnishing side. So really consolidation and really working with partners long term. So the average life length is 9 years working with a partner. So we're not out there just kind of buying. It's really, you build relationships, you work together. And then there was a phase where we really decided on zero tolerance on not following the code, and from the procurement organization to sustainability to all the kind of people involved, it was the same kind of message that this is how we do it and this is how we work, and you need to find ways of complying, and then of course supporting and working together with. So many learnings and different phases, and I would say today the way we work with the supply chain is probably quite different, both in terms of the business, how we work with the suppliers, but also then consequently how we work with sustainability. So much more co-creation and working together, and much more of reviewing and learning from each other and creating these kind of best-in-class suppliers that can share with other suppliers, rather than really auditing and reviewing and following up.
That's great. And there was a key word or a key phrase that you use, which is co-creating. Because one of the things that we see a lot around strategy is that creating strategy or planning strategy or co-creating strategy sometimes it's very easy, or it's very nice, it's beautiful. But then when it has to actually change to that execution side, that's when it gets nasty. That's when it gets really hard. So what would be, again, your tips or your story or your learnings from doing that phase, right? Because it's what you said before, zero tolerance. That means that the message was clear, but then things maybe weren't happening. So how do you make sure that that transition from planning to execution works well?
I think it even when it works well, it's still bumpy, because there's nothing like, I mean, you're working with people, so there's no such thing as just smooth and easy change management process, because change is difficult. It goes a bit against, we say that we are open to change and we know we're not really. But I think having done internally the kind of processing and decision in the management team, so it's not just one person believing in it, but really everyone seeing, yes, this is what we need to do. We're standing behind it for as much as possible, understanding the consequences, not only the financial consequences, but the competence consequences of that decision, so that you kind of feel that you know what you're up to and up for. But also daring to say we will learn as we go, because if you're going to sit and make this perfect plan, knowing every piece, and if I move this will happen, and I move that, then you'll be paralyzed by perfection. I mean, you'll never know. I mean, and everything, especially now, I do reflect talking to other companies how happy I am that IKEA started early, because we've had 10, 20 years of testing and learning before it got this hectic and crazy, where there's a lot of new legislation coming, there's a much bigger consumer pressure, and I wouldn't say that we know fully what we're doing, but we have at least had some rehearsal time to figure it out. So now you need to write your strategy, agree on your strategy, and almost execute on it at the same time, and that is difficult, but that's kind of where we are today.
That's great. That's fabulous. And when it comes to getting support from external parties to drive your sustainability strategy, and that could be consultants, or that could be independent companies that come in and work. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that sustainability has to be a core competency of the company itself, or that externalizing or outsourcing sustainability is something that actually can be beneficial for a company?
Yeah, a good question. I think it might again depend on the phase you're in, and the size of the company, the exposure you have to sustainability. But so maybe I speak more from my experience than what is really how it could be or should be in every company. But my experience says that everything that is a core competence of the company, you need to have in-house. So I think the learning with digital is when it was seen as that we're building a website, to have some business there, but not really key, you could outsource this and you could let others run it. When you start to realize that, okay, we're becoming an omni-channel company and this is not a backbone, but it's actually the business, you start to build good, not just big, but good digital teams because they're the business. And I think sustainability is the same. So outsourcing is, I mean, the worst is if you outsource the strategy writing and then management consultants make a kind of implementation plan and then it lands in the operations and they're like, okay, I was interviewed once, but I don't really know what this is. So what am I going to do with it? So I think you can definitely bring in consultants because it's heavy work doing a strategy. But the sustainability strategy has to be part of the business strategy. So you can't bring them in just to do a sustainability strategy without really connecting it to the business strategy. But you can definitely, I mean, I used to have a relatively, or I would say not relatively, a big sustainability team, if I compare to many of my CSO colleagues, and really, super competent people who've been doing it for many, many years. And still we brought in consultants because you cannot cover the bandwidth from idea creation, doing all the insight that's needed to kind of know, are we choosing and framing the right thing? Because there are 2 million things. If you just take community or human rights or climate, there are 2 million things you could do. And you need to do the thing that is material to you and where you can have the biggest leverage. So you need that support and help in framing it. And then you could also, for some parts, look at what are the different possible avenues in terms of implementation. But you can't outsource implementation because sustainability is about what you do as a company. That needs to be integrated into your business.
That's extremely relevant. And you also you said the word material, right? And that kind of made me think about, is it better to start small, getting those quick wins and making sure that you're focusing on one thing and that you prove that you can do it? Or is it more about trying to, earlier on in our conversation, you mentioned the UN's global SDGs, thank you. And there's 18 of them, right? And obviously 17. And there's every company or every big company wants to tackle hopefully a few of them, a bunch of them. But sometimes it could bring distraction. It can bring, there's the bandwidth that we have as a company obviously can only reach to a certain level. Do you think it's better for companies that are getting started or that are really going deeper into this to feel that they can master one and move to the next one? Or do you think that if we want to achieve that 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement, we need to tackle a lot of them at the same time?
It's a really, really good question, Lucas. I think it depends on the sector that you're in, and I think the ability of the company that you're in. Because if you're in a huge transformation where most of your bandwidth goes to something else, maybe starting this huge sustainability program is kind of doomed to failure. Then it's better to start something and learn from it and kind of get that traction that, oh, this is possible, we can do it. But on the other hand, the learning we have is that most of these SDGs are interconnected and interdependent. So you cannot look at one thing in isolation. And we talk at IKEA, we talk about 3 kind of wicked problems: unsustainable consumption, climate change, and growing inequalities. And when we launched them 2012 with the first People and Planet Positive strategy, they were interconnected, intertwined, but relatively separate still. What we see now when we did the same kind of survey and research, then looking at our materiality to understand, are we still on track on the right things or have new things popped up that we missed? It's still the same topic, so we're kind of right on the right things. And the interconnectivity between them have actually grown in the last 10 years. And the severity of the topics have increased. So instead of being less important, we're kind of worse on all the parameters. So I think trying to cover all 17 in one go, I think is difficult. I know many say, oh, but it's not a smorgasbord where you choose the ones you feel like working on, because we need to move all 17. And from a country and government perspective, absolutely, because you have all the dimensions in your country. But as a company, when you do a materiality assessment, you will see that if we manage this and this, it could be, you have a huge water dependent supply chain, then dealing with the water SDG is quite critical. Or you are in infrastructure and building cities, then yeah, the one connected to that in the SDGs is where you can make the biggest difference. So I think it's both understanding where are you mostly negatively impacting the planet or society, but also where is it that you have core competence where you could actually be the most part of the solution. And that's what you should kind of choose your selection.
Super clear, super clear. All right, so as we wind down into the last bit of our conversation, Pia, I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can tell me how does this look like at IKEA, but that is, who needs to be the 3 or 4 key stakeholders? And when I mean stakeholders, I mean internal employees within the company that need to have sustainable metrics attached to their bonuses or to their performance evaluations for sustainability to be actually a core topic or core importance thing to the business. Because again, we go back to this idea of it's sometimes planning is so nice and so simple and it looks so good and setting objectives are beautiful, but then we need to execute. And if those ideas are not involved in the money that goes into our pocket, even if we have purpose, then usually the focus can change very simple. So who would be the 3 or 4 key players that need to be addressed or need to have these metrics within their bonuses?
Yeah, it's the same boring answer as before. It depends. I think it depends on what you put in your strategy and what you identify as the key stakeholders for you. So if a lot of your footprint sits in the supply chain, which if I take a climate perspective, for the most part, scope 3, so the one that has to do with your downstream and upstream, is for most companies 70%, around 70% or more of your footprint. So then, of course, procurement is a key critical player in the journey. So I would say procurement. Then, depending again on, are you more maybe industry based, so factory, you have a huge factory footprint, then it would be the business unit with those units in. Are you more in the service industry, then maybe it's another aspect of your business. So I really think it depends on where is your biggest impact and what's your also sequencing of things, because maybe you can't drive all the topics at the same time. So where do you start? But I would say you need the CEO and top management. Definitely need them with you, because it is about change management. It is, I would say, maybe not 10, 15, 20 years ago, or it was, but maybe not as explicitly stated. But today it is about transformation. You can do the low-hanging fruits, and you fixed your operations. You look at how you put energy into your factories or your offices, or how you travel, and all these things. But you will come to a point when it starts to be about which products do we offer, which services do we offer, which is the business model we're having, what's our strategic approach to customer retention. You'll get all of those relatively quickly. So then you need the top executive team, and I would say you need a board, because some of these decisions today, when it comes to sustainability, are long-term strategic direction decisions, and then you need a board. So I would say procurement, top management. So those are 2. I would say initially, and now I speak more from experience, initially for IKEA, the communication and marketing department were a key critical part, because it is about also not just externally, but how do you do the internal communication? How do you engage employees? So building that narrative is a key part. But I would say that's a kind of as an enabler to the journey. But I would say sales, otherwise it's the sales team, because that's when you start to really see this as, this is part of who we are. This is part of our offer. This is what we talk to our customers about, if it's B2B or B2C. So I would say procurement to fix your scope 3, top management to secure the change management journey, communication as an enabler, and the sales organization, commercial organization, to really get that kind of movement going.
That's great. 2 more questions then. The one is, do we need to focus on consumers and customers to understand what bugs them? Or when it comes to sustainability, do you guys do that? Or is it you doing your own research, and obviously from your statistics and metrics, you understand then what are the most or the real materiality behind what you want to work on? Or sometimes if consumers feel like something is more important than what it actually is, it's better, or it's good to address that before. I can give you an example. I'll go back to this boring idea of the LED lights, but one thing is to say, for us, LED lights maybe doesn't impact the consumption of kilowatt hours that we have throughout the year, or it does, but it's not as big as changing the delivery trucks. But consumers, they are more now, that's more visible, and that's the low-hanging fruit for them. And if that's the case, then what would you address first?
Yeah, I mean, we have tons of examples like that through the kind of 20-25 years when we've been working with sustainability in IKEA in a kind of consistent, thorough matter. You will always end up with what I call pest or cholera decisions. This very seldom where you find the topic where you can tick every box, and if it's great for climate, then maybe it's not good for human rights, or if it's not for ethics, or you'll always end up with these kind of dilemmas. And that's why it's so important that you internally have decided what are we prioritizing, which ones are we really want to drive, and when you have that kind of pathway, then you might, and it's maybe easier for a big brand like IKEA, but we try not to jump on the latest trend. If we know that the biggest things for us is X, Y, and Z, then we can't jump onto something just because that's where the consumers are, or an NGO is that certain day, because if we know it's not really material to us making a difference, then of course we can put some effort to it, but we can't put all our energy into something that we know. And that's why having this total value chain materiality assessment is so important, because you can transparently share it also in the annual report. Like, we know that if we, it's so, everything becomes so political and sensitive, but if I take business travel, which is kind of easy now because no one can travel, but that's like less than 1% of the climate footprint of IKEA. So we could put all our effort into, which we have, everyone is on Zoom and Skype today, and Teams, but and we had all that before, but or we could shift everyone to trains or stay at home, and we do all that because it's important to our coworkers. But we need to be real and understand it's 0.5%. So even if we address that to 100% to its best, it's marginal compared to really looking at what are the raw materials we're putting in our products, in which factories are they produced, how do we build our logistics network so that we get it to be as smart as possible. So you need to understand these things, or it could be topics, material, it can be countries. So you need to kind of have that guiding star internally in you, because you will always be like, why are you in this? Why are you doing that? We are doing this because we've done this research. This tells us blah, blah, blah. And we do a lot of consumer research, both in terms of understanding which topics are they willing to move on, because we have a lot of work on trying to inspire inspire changing consumer behavior towards more of healthy, sustainable. So, skip the incandescent light bulb, go to the LED one, or start sorting your garbage, or put solar panels on your roof. So we need to understand where are they and what's the mechanisms to kind of get more people to want to shift to that. We need to understand what are the topics that they're really looking for, and what are the kind of make or break topics that if we are seen as not being responsible in this area, they'll just kind of go away. And then we also measure through our normal brand tracking, what's the perception of IKEA, what's the feeling towards IKEA when it comes to both the ethical side, the social side, and the environmental side. So we kind of do all three.
Beautiful. And my last question is not about hot dogs or meatballs. It's about independent researchers. I was actually talking to one of my close friends, and he actually has an independent sustainability consultancy, and he actually told me or said, why don't you ask this question, which is how important is for big companies to collaborate with independent research centers in whatever topic it might be. Like he said something about aerodynamics, for example, aerodynamics in cars. And obviously you can do your own research, but there are so many centers around the world, or research centers, that are specialized in these things. So what is IKEA's policies on that? And what do you think should be for other companies around the world?
It's a good question, and there's many answers in it, but I would say in general, most of the research we do is with partners. It's not us doing the research. I mean, if there's one thing you learn in school, is that with statistics, depending on what you put in as the question, it steers what you get as the outcome. So I would refrain from either consciously or subconsciously doing research is just going to prove the point that you wanted, because then you've just wasted a lot of time and money. So if you don't want to change, then I guess there's a risk of issuing research that just proves that there's no need to change, really. So I think working with independence, and depending on how we define independence, because everyone gets their money from somewhere. So I think it's being conscious of who is funding what research institute. But yes, no, definitely. I mean, we work with academia, we work with NGOs, we work with research institutes. You need that kind of mix. And if you start to see that they're all independently starting to paint the same pictures of where things are heading, then most likely that is where it's heading. And I think in general, to always reflect on what does this person have to gain from giving that answer? Because of course, if you're an NGO, now I'm probably political again, but if you're an NGO caring for, I don't know, mouses, like, whatever, stupid, but something, for them, that's the most important thing on the whole planet. And they'll have a tendency to find all the things that proves that is the most important. And that again is when you have to have your screening as a company, knowing, what's our values, culture, who are we, what do we want to stand for? And then the materiality assessment, what is really scientifically the most important things for me? And then you might have to say no to that mouse NGO, because you know that you can't really make a huge impact working with them, and it's more relevant for them to go and work with someone else where it is actually a material for them. Beautiful.
Pia, anything that I should have asked you, or that you would have liked me to ask you before we wrap this up?
Oh, that's such a good question. No, I think I've covered most of the things. I think one thing that I often do say is, and I don't know if I have said today, is I think it is important to dare to test and learn and be agile. So my general recommendation is, don't sit around and wait for the perfect answer and perfect solution. Get going, because things change so fast. So the things you think is okay today won't be tomorrow. So that's my biggest concern, is when I see this kind of laggard, like I'm going to wait and see what the others are doing, and then I'm going to jump on. because don't underestimate, first of all, the signals you send, which it's maybe me more the moral obligation point of view, but the signal you send when you as a large brand start to say, you know what, we're going to go renewable, or we're going to go away from this. You send a signal to the governments that companies are behind. They want to go in this direction. I dare to put legislation in this space. You send a signal to consumers, to your competitors. So you send a signal. But even more importantly, internally, you get that head start of learning so that when all the others start to jump on, you actually have 5 or 10 years experience and you're ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. That was a beautiful conversation. I could stay forever, and hopefully we'll have a second version in in the future. But I wish you the best for the rest of your day, for your week, and once again, hope to see you very soon.
Thanks a lot. It was lovely to be here talking to you.